Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to talk about variables. First things first, just like Python, JavaScript is an untyped language. This means that variables declared in JavaScript can contain values of any data type. Therefore, just like in Python, there is no need to tell JavaScript what kind of data type a variable will hold. So whether you want to declare a variable to store a number, an array, or an object, you will just have to declare a variable and assign it a value. However, the first big difference in declaring a variable in Python versus JavaScript is that in JavaScript you need to use a specific keyword to tell the language that you want to declare a variable. And so, starting with JavaScript ES6, meaning the JavaScript version following the ECMAScript 2015 standard, variables can be declared using three distinct keywords. The first keyword is var, and it is used to declare variables with function scope and global scope. The scope of a variable is of course the environment where we can actually access and use the content, the value stored in a variable. The second keyword is let, which is used to declare block scope variables, and the third keyword is const, used to declare constants. Before JavaScript ES6, variables could only be declared using var, which could easily lead to errors in the code. Let's make some examples to understand the differences. So as you can see here, I've written some code divided into columns so that we can make some comparisons. Let's start talking about the left column. So we've said that using the var keyword, we have the opportunity to create variables that can have both global scope and function scope. The scope assigned to a variable will therefore correspond to the environment where the variable has been declared. As you can see, I've also declared two functions called myFunction, but for now just focus on the way we declare variables in this lesson. We're going to talk about functions in a future lecture. So as you can see here in the first line of code, I've declared a variable, x, using the var keyword, and I've assigned the number 1945 to the variable. Because the variable is declared globally, meaning outside of a function, because of that, the variable has global scope. Therefore, I can access the value here. The code written here outside of a function can use x. Therefore, we can, for example, pass it to console.log so that we can have the output shown in the console. But at the same time, because the scope is global, also the code inside of the function can use x. And I can therefore pass x to console.log even within the myFunction function. On the right column instead, what's happening is that I've declared the function, myFunction, and inside of this function I've declared a variable, pi, and to pi of course I've assigned the value 3.14. And so because variables declared locally, meaning within a function, have function scope, using var, because of that only the code within the function, the code here, can use pi, can access its value, while all the code outside the function cannot use pi. So as I said, before JavaScript ES6, before ECMAScript 2015 was released, we could only declare variables using the var keyword, but now we can also use another keyword, let. And variables declared using let can have block scope. And so the difference is that with block scope, variables declared using let within blocks of code defined using parentheses, specifically curly braces, cannot be used outside of the code block. So as you can see here, I have defined a block of code using curly braces, and within this block of code, I've defined a variable, z, using the let keyword, and to this I've assigned a string, orange. So z cannot be used outside of the code block. This is very cool because using the let keyword, we can keep our code ordered and clean, avoiding potential errors and confusion. As you can see here, I have again two pieces of code divided in two columns, and here on the left column I've declared a variable, x, and of course here outside in the global scope, x contains the value 10, the number 10 is assigned to the variable. So above this block of code, x equals 10. Then I've declared the block of code using curly braces, and I've reassigned x using var, and I've assigned the number 2 to the variable. Therefore, within here, within this block of code, the value 2 is assigned to x. And what's happening is that now, outside in the global scope, again here, the value of x is now 2. So the value has changed. And that's because, again, using the var keyword, we can only have global scope and function scope. On the other hand, using let, considering that we can now have block scope, what's happening is that up here in the global scope, I've defined a variable x, and again, I've assigned the value 10, the number 10 to the variable. So in the global scope, x equals 10, you see, but within the block scope, where I've reassigned the variable, x contains the value 2, which is the value that, of course, I've assigned using let. The third way to declare a variable using JavaScript ES6 is using the const keyword, which, again, allows us to create constants, meaning that the value assigned to a variable defined using const cannot be changed. So as you can see here, I'm defining a variable using the const keyword, pi, and to pi I have assigned 3.14. And then here below I'm trying to reassign a new value to pi, but as you can see I get uncaught type error. Assignment to constant variable, which is forbidden. Let's make a couple more examples using the console. Okay, so first of all we said that using the const keyword we can define constants, meaning variables that once declared will hold the value assigned that cannot therefore be changed. So we can define a constant, const x equals 10, so x of course as 10. And we can, of course, do whatever we want with it, such as, for example, pass it to console log. We can check the type of x, but we get an error if we try to assign a new value to x. So this is pretty straightforward, right? The most important difference is between var and let, therefore the variables that we can define using those keywords. So let's talk about var. Let's declare a variable using var, y. We can assign the value 2, and so of course now if we go with console.log we get 2. We can now try to define a block of code, and here we can now reassign the variable, meaning declare another variable called y. So var y equals 4. For example, we can close the code block, and now here outside of a block, we see that y contains 4. And this is something that can easily lead to errors. Therefore, most of the times, you will want to use the let keyword to define variables, so that you can actually have block scope. So let's define a new variable, z equals hello, and then here we can access z, and of course z contains the string hello. And here we can define a block of code, and within this code block we can reassign z using again let, and maybe here we can add something like 1942, a number. And so if we try to access z from within the block of code, what we get is 1942 of course, but if we try to access z from the global scope, we get hello. So that was it for this lecture about variables in JavaScript. What's really important to remember is that even though we have different keywords that we can use to declare variables, some of these are, let's say, better most of the times for most of the code that you will end up writing. So what I suggest you do is you use var, the var keyword, only when you really want to declare a global variable. Maybe you have a token or something that you want for whatever reason to move around in your code from top to bottom, but most of the time I definitely suggest you use the let keyword. This is the keyword that I really suggest you remember, especially when dealing with function, as we'll see in the future lectures.